At my son's waterfront wedding, his new mother-in-law demanded my Siesta Key villa and my $33 million resort chain as a gift delivered before the cake, smiling like it was etiquette instead of extortion. I refused. She tossed a glass of water in my face, and I walked out, dialed one number, and waited 10 minutes while the only person they never expected to see stepped in and turned their celebration into paperwork. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. I own Gulf Star Resorts because I learned how to count every chair and every towel. If 10 rooms show 2 bath sheets each, I expect 20, not 19 and a damp story. That's how a waitress with a studio apartment and a second-hand Corolla became a woman with a small villa on Siesta Key and a company worth, on paper, $33 million. I didn't marry money, I built it. And I protect it like breath. Evan is my only child, a gentle 6-foot engineer who apologizes when someone else bumps into him. When he brought home Lena, I recognized his posture, taller, brighter, relieved. She was the girl who did her homework early and still laughed at the dog. I liked her on sight. Her mother, though, Marisol, arrived with opinions the way storms arrive in August, sudden, loud, and convinced the world needed rearranging. The first red flag didn't look red. It was a family tradition email sent 3 months before the wedding. Marisol wrote about how both families should merge assets to symbolize trust. Attached was a 2-page custom gift letter drafted on a template that still showed another family's name in the file properties. They wanted my signature transferring the deed of my villa and a majority block, 51%, of Gulf Star, to a fresh LLC called Sunbay Holdings. I looked up Sunbay on the Florida Corporation site. It had been registered 8 days earlier by her cousin. I printed the email, slid it into a labeled folder, and sent Lena a soft, careful text. I want to keep your wedding peaceful. I'll handle this quietly. But then, a second message arrived with a deadline. Traditionally, gifts are finalized 1 week before, Marisol wrote, so we can announce them after vows. She followed up with a brunch invitation at a hotel I didn't manage, a place with polished marble that smelled of new money. While she talked about status harmony, I stirred my coffee and let her speak herself into the kind of sentences that read well during hearings. The clause that caught me used the word obligated. Gifts are not obligations. I went home, called my attorney, and paid an $8,200 retainer that night. I didn't tell Evan everything. He and Lena were planning a ceremony on the bayfront terrace of a historic mansion in Sarasota, the kind of place where old oaks wear string lights like pearls. He was wrapped in cake flavors and band set lists. I wanted him to keep that bubble. My job was the weather outside the glass. We started simple. My attorney, Ruth, drafted a response, polite, non-committal, and useless as kindling. She also ran a pull of public records. Sunbay Holdings had no assets. Marisol had 2 UCC liens filed by a private lender, and a past small claims judgment for unjust enrichment that she'd satisfied only after a wage garnishment. Not criminal, but crowded. We saw where the river wanted to run, except it wasn't just a river, it was a plan. On a Wednesday in June, Ruth forwarded me a late-night text thread from a number saved in Lena's phone as Tia Isa. The aunt had added me to a group by accident, then removed me when she realized it. For a bright 30 seconds I read their roadmap: pressure for a merger gift, move shares to Sunbay, sell deadweight hotels, and force seat on the board to protect daughter. They used the word force twice. I stopped reading when my hands started to shake. Not with fear, adrenaline. I took screenshots and printed them. Paper is heavy in all the right ways. I set my own plan. If they wanted an announcement after the vows, I would give them one, but mine would carry a court stamp. Ruth filed a civil complaint for civil extortion and tortious interference, and moved for a temporary injunction prohibiting harassment and false statements about my business. She did it on a Thursday morning, ex parte. A quiet judge signed it with a penciled note to set a return hearing in 2 weeks. The paper sat with our process server under hold until green. The green would be a phone call, 1 number. That was all I had to do. On the rehearsal night, Marisol tried a last shove. She cornered me by the caterer's staging area and called it a misunderstanding, then reached for pretty words like mother's love and security. When that didn't land, she tried fear. If you refuse, I will go to your staff, she said, and explain how unstable your leadership is. I watched her speak and thought of bath towels. I run payroll every Friday, I said. My staff knows exactly how stable I am, but then, on the morning of the wedding, a new complication arrived by email, a scanned quitclaim deed conveying my villa to Sunbay, filled out in black pen with a signature that tried to be mine. It wasn't a good forgery. The M pretended to know how I curve it. The notary block used a commission number that had expired in 2021. It would have been funny if it weren't so stupid. I forwarded it to Ruth and called the county recording office to ask about fraudulent filings. The clerk on the phone told me to sign up for their alert service. I already had. 10 minutes later, an alert pinged. Someone attempted to e-record a deed with my parcel number and got rejected for a notary error. I printed the alert and slid it into my folder behind the fake deed. The folder was getting thick. I wore a slate silk dress and low heels because grass is a trap. The bay was bright blue, the kind of July blue that sells postcards. Music played. Guests lifted phones. Evan stood up front, trying to memorize his vows without moving his lips. Then, just before the officiant took his place, the wedding coordinator whispered that Marisol wanted me in the library for a quick blessing. I knew the library. Dark wood, a Persian rug, walls of books that smelled like old paper and salt. I also knew what was coming. I told the coordinator I'd be 10 minutes. The door closed and the temperature dropped. Marisol stood there with her sister and a cousin I hadn't met, a man in a tight suit whose hairline couldn't keep the secret. The cousin held a cream envelope. "Last chance," Marisol said. "Sign. We announce after vows. Everyone cheers. No drama." I looked at the envelope and then at the window where the bay glittered, almost obscene in its calm. "No," I said. "Not today. Not ever." She smiled the way a person smiles at a child who says a new word wrong. Then she threw a glass of water in my face, a clean, quick flick of her wrist. It wasn't hot. It wasn't even shocking. It was small. But water on silk leaves a mark. I set the envelope on the desk, like it might be a cheap bomb. I took a breath, wiped my face with a linen napkin from the bar cart, and walked out into the hall. My hands didn't shake now. "I dialed Ruth Green," I said. 10 minutes later, a man walked into the library. He wore a navy blazer that looked like it had 2 more jobs to get to and a badge clipped to his belt. Not police. Private security. The venue's off-duty sheriff's lieutenant. Beside him came a process server with a leather messenger bag and a calm face that had seen every kind of party. He asked for Marisol by full name, confirmed her date of birth, and handed her an envelope thick enough to change the air. He served the aunt and the cousin, too. The lieutenant read the first paragraph aloud. Enough to make the point, not enough to make a scene. The word injunction carries its own gravity. Their faces drained. "We can talk about this," Marisol said, and for the first time she sounded like someone who understood gravity. "We will," I said. "In 2 weeks, in a courtroom, where there are microphones." But then I remembered Evan standing out there, fragile in happiness. I told the lieutenant to hold them here for 10 minutes and walked back into the sun. I took my seat, silk drying slowly in the heat, and watched my son marry the girl he loved. The vow portion felt like stepping across a creek, one sure stone, then another, then the shore. After the kiss, guests clapped, music rose, and I stayed out of the photographs where they didn't need me. The library door remained closed behind the oak. When the coordinator finally came to find me for family portraits, I nodded and went. I smiled, not because I'm performative, but because the worst had already happened, and, for once, the worst had a paper trail. A storm, of course, doesn't vanish. It turns and tries again from a new angle. 2 days after the wedding, an anonymous Instagram account posted that Gulf star poisoned turtles by dumping bleach into the Gulf. The post used a photo stolen from a beach cleanup in 2015. The caption urged a boycott and tagged my resorts and 3 local newsrooms. My front desk phones went hot for a day, then warmer the next. I didn't respond online. I sent the post to Ruth, who added it to our supplemental filing, and emailed a preservation letter to Instagram, the newsrooms, and a prepaid cell carrier attached to the account. Paper makes storms measurable. Except on Thursday, a Yelp review appeared calling me a thief who steals from her son. The account had been created that morning and only reviewed my properties. The writing had the same tick Marisol's texts had, double spaces before exclamation points. I printed. I didn't argue. If you wrestle a pig, you both get muddy and the pig still enjoys it. The hearing landed on August 1, 2024, in a second-floor courtroom that kept the air at jacket required. I wore dark navy and flats. Ruth placed our folders on the table like a small library. On the other side sat Marisol with a new attorney who tried to look irritated at the ceiling tiles as if gravity itself were malpractice. Lena sat behind them, shoulders tight. Evan sat next to me, his hand bouncing on his knee until I put mine over it. His ring flashed. He was married. The rest of it could be managed. The judge asked for opening remarks and then asked us to keep the opera out of it. Ruth kept it plain. "This is a case about coercion wrapped as culture," she said. She walked him through the gift letter, the Sunbay registration date, the attempted e-recording with an expired notary, the water, the posts, the reviews. She didn't say villain or mother. She said facts and dates. She asked to extend the injunction, order a takedown of defamatory material, set a modest bond to keep everyone honest, and schedule mediation within 30 days on the civil claims. She asked for costs and fees. She did not ask for the moon. Judges remember that. Marisol's attorney stood and tried to move it all into misunderstanding and heat of the moment. He suggested my success made me paranoid. He pronounced Gulf Star like it was a gas station chain. He called the water a splash. Then he tried a pivot I'd been expecting. He said this was really about family, and family doesn't need courts. I wanted to say that families who don't need courts don't draft demand letters with transfer clauses and notary blocks. I wanted to say that family is the people you can hand your keys to, not the ones who ask for the title. Instead, I sat still and let the court reporter do her job. But then the judge leaned forward. He asked a single question that mattered. Counsel, why is Sunbay registered by a relative of your client 8 days before this tradition letter? And why does the letter use the word obligated? The other lawyer tried to float. Gravity works. He said words like template, aspirational, and family office. The judge looked at the folder with the attempted deed and raised one eyebrow. Eyebrows can be gavels. We called one witness. The venue's lieutenant explained the library incident. He didn't dramatize. He just said what he saw: a thrown glass, a raised voice, a process server, a room that got very quiet. We introduced the social posts and reviews and tied them, through preservation data, to a prepaid phone purchased with a card in the sister's name. The judge wrote with a pen that made a satisfying scratch. When it was Marisol's turn, she tried to apologize without admitting. She said miscommunication. She said cultural expectation. She said I love my daughter. She didn't mention my son. She did not look at me. The judge ruled from the bench. He extended the injunction for 2 years applied to Marisol, the sister, and the cousin. He ordered them to remove or request removal of posts and reviews within 48 hours and to cease making any statements about my business pending mediation. He set a compliance check for the following week. He ordered them to pay my documented out-of-pocket costs, $1,250 to replace my water-stained silk dress and cleaning, $8,200 for the initial legal retainer, and he warned that any further interference would result in a $500 per day sanction. He set mediation for August 20, 2024, at 10 a.m., downtown, 3rd floor. He denied their motion to dismiss the civil claims. He did not smile. After the hearing, in the hallway that smells like coffee and old carpet, Lena approached me with eyes that knew too much. I didn't know about the deed, she said. I'm sorry. I told her I believed her. People are not their parents' paperwork. Mediation felt like stepping into a windowless airport lounge, neutral tans, ticking clock, a table that had seen every human disappointment. The mediator, a man with kind hands and a watch old enough to have been wound by someone's grandfather, split us into rooms and shuffled back and forth. He asked me what I needed to make this end. I said I wanted distance and a paper trail that kept my son and his wife safe. I didn't want money as a trophy. I wanted the kind of document that chokes off future stunts. He nodded like someone who has watched families exhaust themselves. We settled after 5 hours. They signed a consent judgment for $75,000 payable to Gulf Star to cover the time my manager spent handling a social storm instead of guests. They signed a written retraction letter addressed to my staff, my vendors, and the newsrooms they had tagged. The letter admitted the posts were false, apologized, and acknowledged an agreed $500 per day penalty if any future interference occurred. They also signed a 5-year non-interference and no-contact clause regarding my business and a 3-year limited no-contact order with me personally, except for gatherings where I gave written consent. The mediator stapled, stamped, and handed us copies that felt heavier than paper. But then, because life tests settlements, a cousin posted a vague "some people buy family" meme 2 weeks later. Ruth sent a one-line email with a screenshot and an invoice for $500. It never happened again. At the reception, back on the day with string lights, Evan eventually learned something had gone wrong. He noticed the watermark on my dress and the way the lieutenant hovered near the bar for an hour. Later, when he and Lena returned from their mini-moon, I told them a quieter version. He listened with his jaw set and then hugged me for a long time, like he used to when I worked double shifts and he waited up, crayons on the table, drawing me a boat to somewhere easier. I didn't tell him every figure or every clause. He doesn't need to carry my ledgers. But he knows this: The villa stays mine because I paid for it with mornings that began before the sun, and nights that ended after it. The company stays mine because I count towels. His marriage stays his because he and Lena choose it every morning, not because their mothers fight over property like dogs over a bone. We choose our families. Paper just backs us up. Last week I walked through Gulf Star's oldest property, the first one I scraped enough courage to buy. The terrazzo floors still hold the echo of my first steps as an owner. I counted pool chairs. I asked housekeeping how the new vacuums were working. I looked out at the Gulf and thought about the library with dark wood and a wet dress, and a door that made the air quiet. The quiet was worth everything. I kept the folder. It sits in my office, safe between the deed to the villa and a photograph of Evan at age 7 holding a sand dollar like it was a moon. Sometimes I take the folder out and feel its weight. It doesn't feel like anger. It feels like balance. In the end, revenge wasn't a scream or a scene. It was paper, timestamps, and the right man walking in at the right minute. It was the sound of a judge's pen, and the quiet relief of a promise that stays kept. And it was watching my son dance with his wife while the bay reflected lights like stars, and knowing the only thing I'd given away that night was a glass of water I let dry.